Welcome, everyone. I think we'll get started. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Jillian McConnell, and I'm a knowledge broker with Brain Exchange. And on behalf of my colleagues from the MS Society of Canada, we welcome you and are so pleased that you're able to join us this afternoon. Before we begin, I want to take a few minutes just to review the technology we will use today. The audio is provided over the phone, which means if you're hearing my voice, then you're all set. And the visuals or the slides are provided by the online link that you would have received in the connection details. And that way you can watch the slides as our presenter speaks. On the bottom left of your screen, you will see a blue bubble. And if you move your cursor or your mouse over it, you'll see Chat with the Presenter pop up. Click on that, and that's our chat pod. And that's how you can communicate with me during the event, as well as with the presenter during the Q&A. I do want to make mention that only the presenter and I can see your notes in the chat pod, not your fellow participants. And this is also, as I said, where you can send your questions. I also want to make you aware that all of your lines have been muted for this call, just for the time being. That helps us minimize any background noise or private conversation that may be happening. If you need to ask a question or have a concern during the actual presentation, then please use the chat pod, as we won't be able to hear you. The presentation itself is being recorded, and within a week or so it will be available on the MS Society of Canada's website as well as on the Brain Exchange website. So for the purpose of today, those are really the only features you need to be familiar with. The webinar is scheduled to be 90 minutes in length, and our presenter will speak for about an hour or so, and then we'll have the remaining 30 minutes at the end for some Q&A and a discussion. I do ask that you refrain from asking questions in the chat pod until the end of the discussion, unless, of course, the question is technology related, and then we'll do our best to help you out. Okay, so now that the technical aspects have been taken care of, I want to take the opportunity to review a few bits of information that the MS Society of Canada has asked that I share with you on their behalf. So the MS Society of Canada gratefully acknowledges the educational grant received from Biogen, which makes possible this education session. And the MS Society does not approve, endorse, or recommend any specific product or therapy, but provides information to assist individuals in making their own decisions. Identification of needs, determination of objectives, selection of content and speakers, educational methods, and materials are the sole responsibility of MS staff and advisors. And as well, we wanted to just share again the MS Society of Canada's mission statement, and that is to be a leader in finding a cure for multiple sclerosis and enabling people affected by MS to enhance their quality of life. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce our topic and our presenter for today's webinar. So today we'll be talking about the evolving landscape of MS treatment, and we're so pleased to have Dr. Amy Semaka with us today. So Dr. Semaka is a pharmacist working in and around the city of Edmonton. She graduated from the University of Alberta with a Bachelor of Pharmacy degree and went on to complete another year of training in the university's Doctor of Pharmacy, or PharmD, program. The PharmD program exposed Amy to training in various settings, including intensive care, hematologic oncology, family medicine, and academia. She has continued to be actively involved in the alumni of her faculty and is currently part of a research team finalizing a scoping review on the roles of community pharmacists across the world. Having previously worked in HIV, Amy now works in Edmonton's inner cities, where she provides care for her patients with drug addictions and is collaborating with various health providers to develop a pharmacist-led hepatitis C program. At the pharmacy, she also conducts comprehensive assessments for patients interested in pursuing medical cannabis for numerous reasons, ranging from chemotherapy-induced nausea to degenerative disc disease to harm reduction. When she is not at the pharmacy, Amy works for a family medicine clinic in Spruce Grove, where she provides annual medication and health reviews for patients, assists with pain management and opioid use reviews, develops educational resources for her colleagues, and provides general support for the physician team she works with. Through her training and experience, Amy has provided care for many patients with multiple sclerosis, and as a member of the Board of Directors from the MS Society, Edmonton, and Capital Region Chapter, she enjoys staying abreast on new research, developments, and therapies in the ever-changing field of MS. So, Dr. Semaka, we welcome you today, and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Jillian. Jillian, you can hear me, I think?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, perfect. There we go. Awesome. We're unmuted. Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you guys all had a great morning. So as Jillian mentioned, my name is Amy, and I am a pharmacist in Edmonton. My intention today is to provide everyone with just sort of some snapshots of a variety of topics that not only have I been asked about, but I've also had questions about myself. I tried to make this presentation not overly scientific, but more patient-focused. So what my patients want to know, and what might they be interested in learning. These are my disclosures. I have no commercial or monetary relationships that would influence this presentation. I did meet with representatives from the pharma industry solely for just seeking, privileged presentation material, but I was in no way biased by these meetings. So I thought we would just start off by looking back at how MS therapy has evolved over time. These are your standard MS drugs, and the dates are when the drugs were first marketed in Canada. Of course, we started off with the interferons and Copaxone in the 90s, and really not much else happened during that time. There was a substantial gap in drug development between 1998 and 2006, then nothing approved until 2010, and then pretty much a burst in drug development with a new drug coming out essentially every year. There are 15 drugs on this slide, all very unique and with a wide spectrum of mechanisms in terms of how they act to cause their effects in the body. So it goes to show that we still have a lot to learn about MS, but the ideas for drug development seem almost endless at this time. Now, some of you may not know how or where to access information on the medications from the previous slide, so I thought I would put in a few slides to show you guys where to locate that information on the MS Society website. So you can start at mssociety.ca, and if you hover or click on MS information, there will be a drop-down menu that pops up, and you can just click on treatments. Takes you to this slide here, which has a number of options on the left-hand side, and of course you can click on medication. And then that brings us to this slide here, which enables us to, kind of look at a variety of areas for management of MS. So if you're looking to look at some of the medications from the previous slide, you would be looking at the disease-modifying therapies or DMT area. And so from here, you can kind of find out how the medications work, how they're dosed, common side effects, and so on. The information is all accurate and it's up to date, and it's just a reputable resource for you to use that maybe you weren't aware of before. So now that we've looked back in time and kind of looked at the drugs that we do have available, I thought that we would look forward and look at what's being studied in regards to MS and potentially some new treatments that are in the works. It's really fascinating to me, I think, how many trials are actually going on in the world for MS, and they're not just drug-related. So I thought I would show you just some snapshots of a couple databases that are freely accessible to the public, and the links are at the bottom of the slide. So the first one here is Health Canada's database. This database includes clinical trials that involve Canadian sites, and there were 36 trials going on when I searched this site back in March. The next site is clinicaltrials.gov. This site is provided by the National Institutes of Health out of the United States. So they have information on trials in the US and in 203 other countries. And they had 1,635 trials on MS when I looked in March. What's neat with this website is that you can actually find trials on a map. So it sort of gives you a visual breakdown of how many studies are being conducted in Canada versus the US versus Australia and so on. This one here is the World Health Organization. That's another database that includes countries from around the world, and they had 2,314 trials on MS when I looked in March. So just something fun for you guys to look at. Maybe some people heard about a study that they wanted to look more into the details of it or wanted to be a part of a study or whatnot. All right, I do find that a lot of patients and colleagues and even board members are really curious about how drugs for MS are actually developed. So I thought we would spend some time talking about the general picture of drug development from idea to creation to market. This timeline from innovativemedicines.ca is a really nice summary of the steps involved in drug discovery, but of course we know the whole process is much more complex. I'm going to spend some time just talking to each section of the timeline. As you can see, it takes between 10 to 15 years for a new and innovative medicine to make it from drug discovery all the way to market. The pre-discovery step that's at the far left typically involves researchers brainstorming mechanisms involved in the pathogenesis of a disease, and identifying some sort of drug target within that mechanism. Ideas may come from insights into a disease process, learning of unpredicted or unanticipated effects of a drug that already exists, or maybe new technologies that come out and change the way we can do things, such as being able to better target drugs or manipulate DNA. In the drug discovery phase, researchers may screen 5,000 to 10,000 proposed drug candidates for an interaction with their specified target and evidence of activity for the actual disease or condition that they want to treat. They'll narrow in on around 250 compounds to test further in the preclinical phase, and will analyze these compounds using sophisticated methods to elaborate on the compound's specific characteristics, essentially. In this stage, researchers are ultimately focused on testing for signs of toxicity in order to decide whether their candidate compound should actually be taken forward and tested in people. All of these steps together can take about 3 to 6 years to complete alone. In the clinical investigation step, which as you can see is in between the preclinical stage and phase 1 of clinical trials, researchers are going to further narrow down on a few of their most promising lead compounds that they really want to test in humans. Moving into clinical trials, these are the trials that are done in people. So we've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and we're going to talk about phase 4 a little bit later. Phase 1 trials are intended to further determine the safety and tolerability of a drug candidate. They're conducted in about 20 to 100 volunteers or people with the disease or condition in question, and they may last several months. These trials are looking specifically at how is the drug absorbed, how is it distributed within the body, how does it get metabolized and excreted or cleared from the body. And about 70% of drugs actually pass this phase and can move on to phase 2. Phase 2 clinical trials are intended to evaluate a drug's efficacy and side effects, as well as its optimal dose and how it should be scheduled. They're conducted in several hundred people with the condition in question, and they may last several months to 2 years. About 33% of drugs will pass this phase and move on to phase 3. So a much smaller percentage here, because now some side effects are potentially being observed, and it's not safe to keep going with testing. Phase 3 clinical trials are intended to continue evaluating the efficacy of the drug at a defined dose and also monitor for additional adverse reactions that participants may be experiencing. So you can see a lot of this is, are we seeing any side effects? That's a big focus of a lot of these trials. The drug may also be compared to or combined with other commonly used treatments during this phase. This is the last step before the drug is submitted for approval to Health Canada, and these trials are much larger. So now you're looking about thousands of people who have the disease or the condition and potentially lasting for a few years. About 25 to 30% of drugs will pass this phase. So drugs are then submitted to Health Canada for regulatory review. And this essentially entails looking at all of the data that was recorded from the pre-discovery steps at the very far left of this timeline to now. And it may consist of hundreds of files, which is why it can take months or even years for a review to actually be completed. If the drug is approved, of course, the manufacturing company has to make a lot more of it and scale up its production in order to get it out on the market. And at which point the drug will have market exclusivity for 8 to 10 years. Now, phase 4 trials are not shown on this timeline, and they're also known as post-marketing surveillance trials. So these are studies that are done after Health Canada has approved a drug and are intended to further identify and evaluate a drug's long-term effects on a greater number of patients, which may include even pregnant women. These trials are ultimately never ending as long as the drug is marketed. So they're trying to study the drug in the real world, which of course is very different from your pre-market, highly controlled environment in which the other phases of study are conducted. The ongoing evaluation of a drug can generate leads that perhaps enable the drug to be evaluated for other conditions, or alternately generate a signal that maybe some sort of regulatory action should be taken because some sort of obscure side effect has been uncovered. So now that I've talked your ears off about drug development, you see that it is highly complex. It takes thousands of volunteers, chemists, biologists, lab technologists, etc., not to mention thousands of hours for drug development to be successful. And yet there really never is that guarantee of success. Even if a drug passes regulatory approval, its lifespan can be cut short by post-market data and investigations, as we're going to see happened, unfortunately, with Zimbrita or daclizumab. So with the significant time, money, all this dedication that's invested into drug development, it helps us appreciate and respect this whole field of work. So the next time, any of us goes for an injection or maybe takes a pill, perhaps we can revel in knowing a little bit more about how that injection or that pill came to life. This is a video that pretty much sums up everything I just talked about on the previous slide. It's a really nice video that was conducted by Roche. So the link is here. I'm not going to play it now, but it's just a great video that perhaps you can Google, and it's called From Molecule to Medicine, and it's a really nice summary. All right, so in keeping with drug development, I did want to touch on the differences between biologic drugs and your traditional chemical drugs. Biologics do make up a large proportion of MS drugs. They are manufactured using biological or living sources, such as bacteria, yeast, or mammalian cells, and they often employ recombinant DNA technology, or basically genetic modification of these sources. The living source that's chosen essentially becomes a machine, and it starts to engineer a protein that many steps later can be used to treat a disease or a medical condition. And you contrast this to chemical drugs that are created basically by combining specific ingredients in an ordered process, such as your typical aspirin pill. Biologics are very large, they're very costly to make, they're very complex molecules, whereas chemical drugs are small and they're cheap. Because of their size, biologics can't really hide from our immune system. So in certain situations, they may be considered as foreign substances, and the body can mount an immune response against that biologic and subsequently destroy its activity. This ability for a biologic to induce an immune response is referred to as immunogenicity, which will come up on some future slides here. Also, because of their size, it's nearly impossible for biologics to actually permeate through the walls of our stomach and get to where they need to be. So their absorption via the oral route is very limited, and their susceptibility to acid or enzymes in the stomach would really shorten their activity in the body. So these drugs usually have to be injected. Biologics only comprise about 10% of the market today, although I believe this is actually expanding quite substantially. You'll see it with numerous other conditions, not even immune conditions. You'll see it with numerous other things that biologics are popping up more and more. So given the fact that biologics are these large, complex molecules, they may have variable numbers of components within them, and so they're difficult to characterize using current analytics that a lot of labs can offer. So because of this, their manufacturing process must remain essentially unchanged over time. So when you think about the living systems that are used to produce the biologics, they are very sensitive to changes in manufacturing. Even the slightest change can impact the nature of the finished biologic and ultimately how well it's going to work as a drug. This is much less of a concern for chemical drugs because they can be extensively analyzed for purity and concentration and batch-to-batch consistency. Some of you may have heard of the term biosimilar, which is a drug demonstrated to be highly similar to a biologic drug that's already approved. Generally, they're made by different manufacturers once the patent for the reference biologic expires. The approval process is held to the same level of rigor as would be applied to the data required for that original drug. And there must be no clinically meaningful differences between the biosimilar and the reference drug, including no difference in immunogenicity, which I did mention previously. Biosimilars are sometimes mistakenly called generic versions of biologics, but when you think of generic products, they are supposed to have an identical chemical makeup to their brand name counterparts. They may differ in fillers or inactive ingredients, but their active chemical components are identical. And as I talked about on the previous slide, biologic drugs are uniquely derived from living systems. So how manufacturers actually design them is proprietary information. And if someone's attempting to copy that original biologic, that other manufacturer is going to have to design their own cell culture and come up with their own highly complex production steps, which is essentially impossible to do. I mean, it's quite unlikely that someone could precisely replicate the manufacturing process of the original biologic and produce an identical product. So biosimilars can be shown to be similar to the original biologic, hence the term biosimilar, but they cannot be exact copies of the original. And because of this, they're not considered interchangeable. So patients often, need to weigh the risks. If they're on a biologic, they're successful on it, they're stable on it. Do they really want to take that risk and switch to a biosimilar that, has not been shown to be interchangeable to the drug that they're on? And oftentimes physicians will be very cognizant of this as well. All right, changing gears a bit here now, we're going to just move into some of the focused discussion around a few specific drugs. As I'm sure many of you have heard, on February 15th, some very exciting news. Hoffmann-La Roche announced Health Canada's approval of ocrelizumab, or Ocrevus. This is the first disease-modifying therapy to be approved in Canada for primary progressive MS. Ocrelizumab binds to a molecule known as CD20 on the surface of B cells, thereby inducing their lysis, or bursting to death essentially, and causing a depletion of them from the circulation. Oratorio is the trial that Health Canada based its approval on. This trial studied 732 participants with primary progressive MS and found that treatment with the intravenous infusions of ocrelizumab significantly reduced the proportion of individuals that experienced disability progression at 12 weeks compared with placebo, and this reduction was sustained at 24 weeks. As for a little bit of history on this drug's development, Dr. Stephen Hauser has sort of been touted as being the one who suggested researchers start looking at the role of B cells in MS rather than T cells. So ocrelizumab is the humanized form of rituximab, which is a mouse antibody to CD20 that has shown some success in the treatment of relapsing remitting MS and is used to treat some forms of cancer. The humanized ocrelizumab is expected to be less immunogenic, so less likely to cause a reaction in the body and better for longer term or repeated use in patients with MS. Some experts advise that the differences in oratorio are not dramatic, but they are statistically significant, which is a threshold that drug approval organizations such as Health Canada or the FDA look for when they're deciding whether or not to actually approve a medication. Ocrelizumab was the first MS drug to receive a breakthrough designation from the FDA, which put it on a fast track to get through the review process as quickly as possible. So that's pretty unique, considering that this is the first time a therapy for primary progressive MS has showed any impact at all. In Canada, the drug has received a notice of compliance with conditions, meaning it is approved for use, but we need a second study to actually confirm its efficacy and its clinical benefit in patients with primary progressive MS. So here we have some more data on ocrelizumab. As you can see, there were also more improvements in the time required to walk 25 feet with the ocrelizumab group compared to placebo, and significant decreases in the volume of brain lesions and the percentage of brain volume loss. The most common adverse events associated with ocrelizumab were mild to moderate infusion-related reactions, which typically consisted of itching, flushing, rash, fever, headache, throat irritation. But there were no clinically significant differences in rates of serious adverse events or infections. There was one case of PML, or progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It has been reported for one patient that was treated with ocrelizumab. However, this patient had also received prior treatment with natalizumab for 3 years. There were, however, 2 malignancies in the placebo group versus 11 in the ocrelizumab group. 4 out of the 11 malignancies in the ocrelizumab group were breast cancers. So further safety analyses surrounding these differences are ongoing for sure. The Canadian Drug Expert Committee had a meeting on March 21st, and they did recommend that ocrelizumab be reimbursed pending certain criteria and conditions are met. Just a fun fact, the manufacturer's submitted price for ocrelizumab is $8,150 per 300 milligram vial. So what else, may you ask, does Roche have in the pipeline? Definitely more data on ocrelizumab to come, including its efficacy for improving upper body function as well as cognition. Its use in patients between age 55 to 65 and patients with disability scores between 6.5 to 8, as well as, of course, more long-term safety results and its potential in other neurological diseases. There may be some new trials on neuroregeneration and also looking at a really neat brain shuttle to improve drug delivery to the brain. And you should be able to Google this Roche brain shuttle video, and I think it pops up on YouTube, but it's a pretty neat thing that they're working on. There's also a Roche app in development known as Floodlight, and this is going to use some smartphone sensors to actually monitor MS patients using active and passive measures. So hopefully this app can actually help patients and clinicians catch impairments in function or mobility, etc. earlier, and also help them notice when symptoms are getting worse. According to a recent study, this app actually performs as well as specialist assessments in clinic. So now that we have just welcomed ocrelizumab to the market, unfortunately, we do have to say goodbye to another drug, doxycycline. This was an antibody that targeted CD25 on T cells, preventing their activation and subsequently causing a net reduction in T cell responses. It was voluntarily withdrawn by Biogen and AbbVie in March due to increasing safety concerns, including severe liver damage and reports of encephalitis. Over 8,000 patients have been treated with tocilizumab worldwide, and patients that have to stop treatment must be monitored with regular blood tests to assess for any of the aftermath of its use. Patients who were doing well on the drug, unfortunately, still have to stop treatment and potentially start something new upon discussion with their doctor. So because we're talking about a drug that has been withdrawn from the market, I did want to include some information on how Health Canada in particular monitors for adverse reactions to drugs. Health Canada has a program known as the Canada Vigilance Program, and patients, caregivers, healthcare providers, the general public, pretty much anyone, can actually voluntarily report adverse reactions to medications, biologics, natural health products, etc. to this program. It's Health Canada's means of essentially conducting those post-market surveillance studies that I talked about previously and actually monitoring the safety profile of drugs that are marketed to ensure that their benefits continue to outweigh their risks. Reports can be done online, by phone, submitting a form via fax or mail, and you don't even have to be certain that a product caused a reaction in order to report it. It is mandatory for manufacturers to have a system for monitoring drug side effects and catching those warning signs and notifying Health Canada about any new safety information that comes up. If a causal association between a drug and a reported event is established, companies do have to determine whether the benefit of the drug outweighs the associated risk, and depending on the report that they receive, they may make either changes to the product's labeling or advise on measures to take if an adverse reaction does occur. A drug will be recalled if it's concluded that a risk with its ongoing use remains. So that's what essentially happened with Synbrita. The manufacturers thought, nope, we're not going to keep giving this to people and causing more harm. Let's just end it and pull it off the market right now. So there is an online searchable database that contains information about various reported reactions to drugs. And you can actually go on to this database, type in whatever drug you're curious what kind of reports have been out there, and you can, sometimes there's pages and pages of them. So it's just something fun to look at and also useful for you to look at as well. And I've put a link to this database and to the reporting form in the references section of this presentation. So at the end of the day, reporting adverse events enables the capturing of safety risks associated with drug products, including all those previously unrecognized or serious or rare adverse reactions, and ultimately benefits the safety of everyone taking medication. Now for Biogen's pipeline, there are some studies going on for a new and improved version of Tecfidera, or dimethyl fumarate. ALKS8700 is the current name for this potential drug, and it's a monomethyl fumarate prodrug. So monomethyl fumarate is the active metabolite of dimethyl fumarate in Tecfidera, and a prodrug is a drug that's not initially active until the body modifies it into something slightly different and activated that can then exert a therapeutic effect. So gastrointestinal side effects such as diarrhea, nausea, abdominal pain, vomiting, all of those were the leading cause of treatment discontinuation in studies of Tecfidera. So ALKS8700 was designed to provide an improved side effect profile. Safety data for the first month of the Evolve MS1 study are promising. The new compound had low rates of adverse gastrointestinal events, leading to discontinuation compared to placebo, and the incidence of diarrhea was also reduced at 6.6%, so kind of cut in half there. Evolve MS2 is another study going on that's comparing ALKS8700 directly to dimethyl fumarate. There is also a remyelinating antibody potentially in the works, which I think is quite interesting. Opicinumab is an antibody against LINGO-1, which is a protein that suppresses myelination and axonal regeneration by preventing the development of young cells into oligodendrocytes. And these are the cells that are responsible for creating the myelin sheath around our nerves. So by blocking LINGO-1, opicinumab can potentially promote remyelination, restoration of nerve communication, and ultimately the prevention or reversal of disability. And how to monitor this remyelination at a cellular level, I think, is going to be really quite interesting to see. The next drug I would like to talk about is cladribine. So this is an oral medication indicated for relapsing remitting MS, and it did have to go through a few hurdles to get here. Traditionally, it's a cancer treatment marketed under the name Lustatin and indicated primarily for hairy cell leukemia. It was rejected as an MS drug by the FDA in the 90s on the grounds that more data was needed, and then it was rejected again by the European Medicines Agency in 2010 due to concerns of some cancer cases. The EMA, or European Medicines Agency, did approve of the drug in August of last year after a total of 5 clinical trials involving over 2,700 relapsing remitting MS patients were observed for over 10 years. So they had a lot more data to look at. Health Canada has since followed suit and approved of the drug in November of 2017, and the U.S. likely will approve the drug for MS within this year. A meta-analysis has since shown that the risk of cancer is not increased in comparison to that seen with other disease-modifying therapies. But, of course, the risk can't be ruled out entirely, and we do need more long-term follow-up. The recommended dose for cladribine is 3.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight over 2 years, and it's actually administered as one treatment course per year. So each treatment course consists of 2 treatment weeks, which are 1 month apart at the beginning of each treatment year, as can be seen in the figure on the right, which is a little bit blurry. Sorry for that. So, for example, the first course in year 1 would be 10 or 20 milligrams daily, depending on the patient's weight, for up to 5 consecutive days in the first month and 5 consecutive days in the second month. And this would repeat in year 2. Evidently, the drug does have some long-lasting effects on the immune system, with some explanations for this listed on the slide, and that's why they kind of, point out that continuing treatment for a 3rd or a 4th year doesn't offer any additional benefit. The Canadian Drug Expert Committee has recommendations for reimbursement are pending. So last time I checked, they were supposed to be having some meetings between now and May 31st to sort of see what's going to happen in terms of getting this medication reimbursed. So with all of these expensive and seemingly difficult to access and very unique drugs, there are drug support programs that I really think are a staple to make things less complicated on patients, the patient care team, and the general health system. So these are often facilitated by nurses, and they're free programs that provide personalized help for patients who are prescribed or interested in pursuing MS treatment. They may answer questions about MS, provide information on treatment options, and help patients find resources for education and support. Some also offer injection training or infusion support as well, and a significant purpose of the programs is actually helping patients navigate reimbursement barriers. So this includes helping determine insurance eligibility, facilitating insurance authorizations, and exploring additional options for financial support as needed. So just overall, a really great service that's available for MS patients. All right, getting into our next drug, minocycline, much easier to say than the other one. This one has received a fair bit of attention in the media. So traditionally, it is an antibiotic. Nowadays, mostly used for moderate to severe acne and rosacea. Its anti-inflammatory effects are not fully understood in MS, but it's believed to suppress the activity of pro-inflammatory cells and prevent the migration of disease-causing T cells into the central nervous system. The noteworthy 2008 trial by Dr. Metz examined 142 participants at 12 Canadian MS clinics to see what proportion with a clinically isolated syndrome converted to MS at 6 months. So 61% of placebo-treated participants did convert to MS versus 33.4% of the minocycline-treated participants. And that was a 27.6% reduction, and it was considered significant. This was maintained at 12 months, but there was not enough participants for conclusive results at 24 months. The trial has received some criticism, including its small sample size, the fact that initial results were judged after only 6 months. Participants who received minocycline had fewer instances of spinal cord involvement and fewer enhancing lesions than the placebo group. And blinding could have been difficult to maintain because minocycline has some side effects that are hard to conceal, such as diarrhea and rash. The most common side effects with minocycline, apart from diarrhea and rash, are dizziness and ataxia. And ataxia includes gait abnormalities, difficulty walking, poor balance and coordination, and changes in fine motor skills. So it's interesting to me that when you look at some of these side effects, they actually mimic symptoms of MS. And so I would be curious to know how well tolerated this drug actually is for the intended patient population. The side effects generally do get better with continued use. Some less common side effects include bluish-gray discoloration of the skin, nails, teeth, and some other tissues, including something called black thyroid, which you can Google if you really want to be grossed out. Minocycline has also been linked to cases of lupus and autoimmune hepatitis. But recovery is possible if the drug is stopped, and this is generally a rare occurrence. Resistance is likely not significant, but it's still possible, and it may affect susceptibility to other drugs in the class. If you look at that cost, much cheaper than some of the other ones we talked about 20 cents per 100 milligram capsule. All right, flipping onto a controversial topic, that of medical cannabis. So cannabis is, of course, soon to be legalized for recreational use in Canada. A 2017 survey of people with MS found that 47% of respondents have considered using cannabis to treat their symptoms, 26% have used cannabis for their symptoms, 20% have spoken with their physician about using it, and 16% are currently using it. So if you fall into one of these categories, you're clearly not alone. First, to start by talking about what cannabis is. It's a plant that generally is distinguished into two common varieties, sativa and indica. There are many different strains of these varieties, each with different concentrations of two active chemicals known as cannabinoids. So THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, is commonly known to cause the high effects of cannabis, and CBD, or cannabidiol, minimizes the high from THC. THC is believed to inhibit neurons activated by pain in specific areas of the central nervous system, and is typically used for nerve pain, appetite stimulation, and depression. CBD is believed to bind to various proteins involved in pain signaling and also has some anti-inflammatory properties, so it's typically used for inflammatory conditions like arthritis, as well as anxiety and sleep disorders. Unfortunately, the general evidence base for using cannabis to treat various ailments is limited and weak. For example, in MS, most studies suggest that cannabinoids are associated with improvements in self-reported spasticity, but improvements in objectively measured spasticity generally do not reach statistical significance. Most of the evidence suggests that cannabis probably has benefit for various conditions, but this is where a lot of controversy lies because probably is not good enough. Case reports and anecdotes are still outnumbering high-quality studies, and high-quality studies are what medical bodies need to have in order to recommend for or against a treatment. So right now, it's hard to recommend for cannabis because we don't have the evidence, but it's also hard to recommend against it because there could be a benefit for some patients. The typical dose is about 1 gram per day with varying percentages of THC and CBD recommended. And unlike typical prescription medications, we don't have really any established doses, so the general approach is just to start low and go slow. It costs roughly $5 to $15 per gram, and health insurance typically does not cover it, but there is some financial assistance available. So cannabis is generally available as edible products or oil, sublingual tinctures, or it may be vaporized or dried for smoking or inhalation. There are all kinds of formulations coming out that I can't even stay on top of. Edible products often have a delayed onset, they're longer lasting, and they're more discreet to use, whereas inhalation offers a quick onset of effect, it's shorter acting, but it may cause some bronchial irritation or a cough. Some of you may have heard of Sativex, which is an oral spray that's approved for spasticity and neuropathic pain associated with MS and cancer. And each spray will deliver a fixed dose of THC and CBD. Last I looked, it costs roughly about $200 per bottle, and that's only going to last about 12 days if you're using the actual maximum recommended dose. There are quite a range of adverse effects associated with cannabis that depend both on the product and the user. Dizziness, drowsiness, and headache are the most common, along with cognitive impairment. So cannabis use in people with MS has actually been demonstrated to impair information and thought processing, working memory, executive function, and the performance of basic tasks. It is reported that 1 in every 11 users become dependent on cannabis. People who use it more often tend to develop a tolerance, meaning they need more cannabis to achieve the same effect. Now, I don't advocate for cannabis use, but my general approach with most treatments and medications that are out there is that if there's no real or apparent harm in trying the treatment, and it could potentially improve some aspect of a patient's health or quality of life, then why not consider giving it a trial run? This comes with many caveats. We don't know the optimal dosages of cannabis, the optimal strains, the optimal methods of ingestion for specific conditions. We don't know all possible interactions with other medications, and this becomes, very tricky looking at how cannabis interacts with all potential medications it could be used for. There isn't a lot of good evidence for that. And we don't know all the risks associated with long-term chronic use. So what I want to stress is that with the upcoming legalization of recreational cannabis, and whether you're interested in pursuing recreational or medical cannabis, I do believe it's very important to still discuss any intended use with your doctor and your pharmacist to ensure that if you pursue cannabis use, it's indicated for you, it's appropriate, it's safe, and it's actually worth your investment. All right, I've talked a lot about treatments for MS, and perhaps some of you are listening thinking, wondering about how to approach discussions about your care, whether you want to start something, whether you want to stop a treatment, you want to change your treatment, or you just want to improve the overall care that you're receiving. So I thought I would touch on a few general points that hopefully will be valuable in helping achieve the best possible MS care for you and anyone you know at the end of the day. First thing to talk about is the importance of keeping an organized and updated record of your medical history. You're not going to remember all your medical history all the time, all your experiences with medications, every test you had done, all the doctors you've seen, and so on. So you may bounce from doctor to doctor, office to office, even city to city, and essentially you're leaving a different part of your story at each of these places. It can be challenging and frustrating for both patients and their healthcare team to try and collect information from multiple different stories and remember those parts of their history. Keeping a record of everything can help providers give you the best possible care and help them make appropriate choices with you. The next important thing is to monitor symptoms or progression. This means keeping track of what's going on in your body. Believe it or not, you know your body better than your doctor does. There are numerous tracking sheets that are available online, 2 of which I put at the bottom of this slide, along with other ways to track symptoms such as using apps and smartphones. The Floodlight app that I mentioned earlier performs both active and passive monitoring assessments, including mood, pinching ability, drawing shapes, gait behavior, mobility patterns, upper extremity function, and others. So a lot of those important things that should be monitored. Monitoring and keeping a record of changes or improvements can change the course of a visit to the neurologist. I'm sure many of us have left appointments with doctors and then later remember an important detail that we forgot to bring up. So monitoring, writing things down, this can hopefully avoid that. Proactive monitoring can also help patients catch changes in their symptoms at critical times, perhaps when an intervention or a change in treatment can be initiated. And it can help distinguish an MS symptom from a drug side effect and then further help with determining how to manage that side effect. So another important thing is to be informed and use reputable resources, some of which I've listed on the slide. Of course, you've got MS Society and Medscape, and MS News Today actually has some very interesting news articles about what's new and upcoming in MS. Healthcare providers do appreciate when patients know a little bit about what they're interested in talking about, or have just, gone a little bit above and beyond and did some investigating and some research on your own. And it doesn't have to be anything intense and complicated, but it just shows that you read a thing or two and you're serious about what you're interested in discussing. Furthermore, you should go into appointments having a few questions and hopefully having them written down. You often have limited time with your doctor or neurologist, but there has to be a balance between the doctor checking off what he or she needs to do or talk about with you and you getting answers to your questions or concerns. I don't know how many patients I've talked about who have gone to appointments and I said, oh, have you brought that up, or have you asked that, or have you talked about that? And, oh, no, we ran out of time. I'll talk about it next time. Well, when's the next appointment? 6 months, a year? So it's really important that there's that balance in any of those doctor-patient appointments. I should emphasize the age-old adage that no question is a stupid question as well. Just ask whatever you want to ask, and I highly encourage that. And finally, speak up. Don't be afraid to say what's bothering you, and don't ever think that you are a bother to your doctor. Speaking up and stating your concerns helps you be your own advocate. It helps you show that this is important to me and this matters to me. You have a right to be involved in choosing your treatment and determining what your doctor's goals are for your treatment. Maybe his or her goals, are not in line with your own, and this, of course, needs to be brought up as well. Finally, I thought I would just throw in a small pitch on how pharmacists can help with MS management, as I do believe we can help in a variety of ways, whether we're accessing community pharmacies or as part of multidisciplinary clinic teams. We can assist with choosing appropriate disease-modifying therapies, advising on side effect management, determining appropriate medications for symptom management, helping patients monitor their progress or changes, assessing for drug interactions, coordinating drug coverage. But probably the most important is just being an advocate for patients and actually supporting them to advocate for themselves. So to wrap up this presentation, I did decide to include a brief patient case and just simulate some thought on different approaches to treatment and different controversies surrounding treatment. So Ms. G is a 27-year-old female who presented to her neurologist appointment for evaluation of her neurological symptoms. For the past 3 years, she has noticed a persistent stumbling gait and a tendency to fall, along with periodic changes in her visual acuity and feeling exhausted much earlier in the day than usual. Over Christmas, she realized she was having a hard time holding objects in her hands, and she developed bilateral tingling in her feet over the past 2 months. Upon further workup and investigation, the neurologist diagnosed her with MS. Now, I won't go through these 2 figures in detail, but I included them for your reference, as I think they appropriately outline the approach that should be taken to treat and monitor patients with MS. I retrieved them from the MS Brain Health website, and this is a really excellent resource that you should also check out one day when you have a chance if you haven't already. So just a few controversies to discuss. Do we treat Ms. G right away now that she has been diagnosed? Most sources suggest treating early in order to maximize lifelong brain health. And per the American Academy of Neurology, or AAN, starting a disease-modifying therapy early is the best defense against the effects of MS. Would symptoms for 3 years still be considered early? Maybe Ms. G's symptoms have mistakenly been misdiagnosed for the past 3 years. And this is where we really need to be sure that our family physicians are gatekeepers, and they're appropriately recognizing, assessing, and potentially referring patients when MS symptoms are plausible. What do we treat with first? Treatment guidelines are not as elaborate or as well-defined as with other disease states. For example, the Canadian MS Working Group produced updated recommendations for treatment optimization in MS, last published in 2013, and they're 17 pages long. Compare this to the frequently updated Canadian Diabetes Guidelines. There were previously a total of 342 pages. I was pleased to see that the American Academy of Neurology recently released some practice guidelines for starting, switching, and stopping disease-modifying therapies in April of this year. So what if our first treatment choice doesn't achieve agreed-upon goals? There's a phrase, treatment optimization, which entails offering patients the best opportunity of finding a regimen capable of controlling their disease by promptly determining if treatments are producing a suboptimal response and then switching to something that might offer a better outcome. There are two general approaches to optimizing therapy. There's something called a lateral switch between two drugs in the same line of therapy, and treatment escalation to a second-line drug with a potential risk of more serious adverse effects. If the first choice isn't working as hoped, the American Academy of Neurology simply recommends switching to another disease-modifying therapy with a different mechanism of action. Currently, there isn't enough evidence available to determine which disease-modifying therapy a person should start with or switch to based on their original treatment. Therefore, a thorough consultation between patient and healthcare team should take place to discuss the risks and benefits of both starting and switching treatment and taking into account the patient's preferences. At what point should treatment be stopped, if ever? According to the AAN, very little evidence is available on the risks and benefits of stopping a disease-modifying therapy. A new meta-analysis of 38 MS drug trials published in November 2017 has revealed that the efficacy of disease-modifying therapies differs depending on the age of the person treated. The 38 trials together included over 28,000 people with MS and 13 MS drug types. Efficacy was measured by how well each drug prevented disability progression compared to placebo. Efficacy strongly decreased with advancing age, regardless of disability level at the start of the trial. The study analysis also predicted that on average, disease-modifying therapy ceased to be effective beyond approximately age 53. The authors alluded that treating early provides a longer window of benefit and an increase in the cumulative efficacy of medication. However, we have to keep in mind that the degree and length of benefit that individuals will experience from treatment differs based on their own genetic makeup and environmental factors. No clinical criteria have been developed to identify candidates for treatment cessation, and the decision to stop therapy must be made on a case-by-case basis. A 3 to 6 month period off treatment, or referred to as a drug holiday, may be appropriate to aid in deciding whether or not to stop treatment long-term. Lastly, what else can or should be done for Ms. G and all other patients diagnosed with MS? Treatment goals should be periodically reassessed to make sure Ms. G and other patients are happy with their care and their overall treatment plan. Maybe Ms. G elected to not start treatment right away, and that's her prerogative too. Ms. G may benefit from being connected to an MS navigator, connected to a drug support program if and when she starts on treatment, getting involved with a support group or peer support program, and various other resources and services that the MS Society of Canada has to offer. I have officially reached the end of this presentation now. It seems like that went by fast for me. I do want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to listen to my presentation, and also want to thank Jillian for helping facilitate this. Additional thanks just to Keith Johnston and Katie Lacey for granting me the opportunity to give this presentation, and special thanks to Karen Turpin and Rick Burke, who provided me with useful information for my slides. I hope everyone took something valuable away from the presentation today, and now I think I can take questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Amy. Before we actually open the forum to questions, I just have a brief little blurb. I just want to mention sort of the ways in which our participants can ask their questions to our presenter today. So you have two options. You can ask your question over the chat pod, and again, just a reminder that only Amy and I can see, and my colleague from from MS Society of Canada, only the three of us can see your questions, and you will remain anonymous. Or alternatively, if you would like to ask the question verbally over the phone, you can unmute your line individually and ask our presenter that way. If you wish to do so, you just have to press *7 on your individual phone line. And only those who are interested in asking questions over the phone only hit *7, please. I also want to take a moment to let you know that we have an MS navigator, Natasha Vincent, who is also on the line with us today. And as an MS navigator, Natasha uses her knowledge and past experiences in journalism and pharmaceutical sales to help those affected with MS navigate the many resources available, enabling people to enhance their quality of life. So if you have specific questions to the services provided by the MS Society, Natasha will be happy to take your question. And finally, one last thing to note before we jump in. I will be posting some poll questions, and I'm going to put the first one up here right now so you know what I'm talking about. So we're going to be posting some poll questions during this latter portion of the Q&A, and I do encourage you all to answer them before you leave the session. There's about 5 in total, and your answers are anonymous, but they do help us tailor future webinars to meet your needs. So I invite you all to take part in that, and I already see some people are doing so, so thank you. Okay, so we'll jump in and we'll see what people are asking here. So the first question is with respect to an MS tracker. Is there a Canadian version of the MS tracker, Amy, or is there only one just for the MS or for the US? Excuse me.
I just want to clarify, which is that the Floodlight app, or is that the actual trackers that I listed on the slide?
I'll have to wait for this individual to respond. While we're waiting for that, I'll let hopefully that. Oh, here we go. It was the one on the slide.
Oh, the slide. There should be, when I accessed them, I was able to print them all. I think they might have some U.S. terms or things in there, but I was able to access them all in Edmonton, and so I think that they are still applicable and can be used by Canadian patients. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, another question. Is there anything on the horizon with respect to secondary progressive MS?
I did find a little bit. I didn't focus on it too much in this presentation, but there was some studies, I think, using natalizumab now in secondary progressive, as well as fingolimod and something called siponimod, which is similar to the fingolimod drug. As well as a new medication, which I didn't really look into too much, but it's called ibudilast. So those are 4 of the ones that I came across, but I kind of tried to focus mine a little bit more on the primary progressive and whatnot, since that was recently in the news. But hopefully, oh yeah, I see a link there. Yeah, sorry, Susan. Hopefully that should answer your question. You should be able to Google. Ibudilast is probably the most interesting that's new and up and coming. And then Jane's question, what did I say about age 53? Right. So in regards to age 53, there was that meta-analysis that was put out in November of 2017, and the authors kind of, upon their analysis, predicted that on average, disease-modifying therapies cease to be effective beyond approximately age 53. Now, this is just them looking at numerous trials, and who knows if that's one meta-analysis, of course, looking at multiple studies, but that's just one report. So I do stress, too, that, everyone responds differently to medications. Maybe some people, they don't lose efficacy of their drug and it keeps going. Or maybe some people do start to notice that there is a waning in effect around age 50, age 60. I don't even know if there's been more data. I think this is just one meta-analysis that I sort of found because I was trying to find some information on stopping treatment. I don't think there's a lot of evidence around that, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Thank you. So while we're waiting for some other questions perhaps to pop up in the chat pod, I will defer to some that were provided in the registration. So one of the questions that came up through that registration process was, is there a difference between junior seniors, for example, those that are around 65, 66 years of age, versus seniors, I'm presuming maybe say 85 and up or 80 and up, and how they present with MS physically?
Right. I did look into a little bit trying to just see when I was looking more so at stopping treatment, but with the seniors, I think what we have to keep in mind is that there could be different presentations with them compared to the junior seniors because of natural aging and comorbidities that may come along. So, I mean, we can think of vision changes or memory changes or increasing fatigue or changes in mobility. I mean, there are kind of these comorbidities on top of the MS presentation itself, and whether, you know, that's whether those are MS symptoms or more so related just to natural aging, it's kind of hard to decipher what's causing, you know, what's the issue. But that's mostly what I could find, is that the presentation seems to be dependent on what else is going on at that stage of life apart from MS. And I think there are still more studies as well, you know, looking into the MS presentation across the spectrum, even in children, all the way and extending further, because we do know that, you know, MS patients their life expectancy isn't necessarily shortened by any means. So I think there will be more research on that. I really hope there would be.
Thank you for that. So everybody's really quiet today. Not a lot of questions coming in. One of the questions that came up again during the registration was remyelination, if I'm saying that correctly, and
yep.
And sort of the use of it and whether you promote that avenue of treatment and so on.
Right. So yes, with remyelination, the biggest things that I found were that ofacitinib drug that is potentially coming out, and from Biogen potentially, that's something that's in the works. That is, if you Google it, I mean, you can pull up quite a bit of interesting studies and news reports on that, as well as there's something else that I found recently came out, and it was called, I think it's a histamine receptor 3 target. That's a new target that they're looking at for promoting remyelination, and that's actually on the Multiple Sclerosis News Today website. So that was recently put out before, when I was kind of finalizing this presentation in the last couple of weeks. So that would be an interesting one to look for as well. So it's a histamine receptor 3 target, and I don't even think they have a drug, but they just found this target that could potentially become targeted by a medication.
Perfect. Thank you. And actually, Amy, if you can read that, I'm going to get you to take this next question. Any treatments for, and I'm not sure how you pronounce this.
Yep, nystagmus.
Nystagmus, excuse me.
Nystagmus, yeah. So any treatments. I'm not too sure if there is anything. I'm just trying to think. I can't really see any specific drugs. I mean, maybe I might say, I'm not too sure what's been studied. I didn't look specifically, but I'm not even sure if like muscle relaxant type of medications, those don't really do much for muscle relaxation in general. But I can't actually say off the top of my head if there's anything that would control that. That would be a great question to look into. And maybe I'm assuming there might be something that's sort of used off label, if anything, to treat the nystagmus.
Thank you. And we have some more questions coming in here, so just bear with me. So what are the options for secondary progressive, but if you're having frequent relapses?
Secondary progressive but having frequently relapses. With that, I think that's where a lot of the studies with natalizumab and fingolimod and siponimod are potentially going to come into play. I think, yeah, like I don't know. I've seen some evidence showing that, you know, relapsing remitting eventually turns into the secondary progressive, right? So I don't know if a lot of drugs for relapsing remitting are going to be used in secondary progressive, and that's why we're getting more studies using our drugs for relapsing remitting MS in secondary progressive MS trials. So that would be my assumption, is that there potentially could be looking at drugs we already have and studying them in other types of MS.
Okay, thank you. And any recommendations for dealing with spasticity?
Spasticity, yes. There are a few. There are things like you may have heard of baclofen or tizanidine, like certain medications that basically act to settle muscles. They're essentially like muscle relaxants. The evidence for spasticity is not great. I think it's more so settling the body overall. They kind of just make you groggy and things just seem to sort of settle. I don't really promote them too much. Gabapentin is also something that I've seen used quite often for spasticity and has some good evidence for it, along with, of course, there's the potential for things like Sativex or for getting into that sort of cannabis line potentially as, our lower line options after we've tried some more of the prescription medication type.
Mm-hmm. And another question that came up in the registration was whether there was any further info you could share regarding primary progressive MS.
Anything else before primary progressive? Not too much. I mostly focused my search for, just on new drugs, and I kind of wanted to present the up-and-coming snapshots of the medications that would be potentially being used for primary progressive MS. I think mostly, I will be looking at ocrelizumab and potentially modifying other treatments. I mean, ocrelizumab came from a cancer drug, so it'll be interesting to see if other drugs are sort of recreated for primary progressive MS once we find out more about it. That's the problem, is I think there still needs to be that research behind what is actually going on with primary progressive MS. What can we monitor, what can we model to actually show what it's doing, and how do we target those pathways in primary progressive MS. But combination. I see Christine is wondering about combination. Also combination for primary progressive MS. I think there's going to be more studies of adding on. Say we have ocrelizumab as a base drug. Do we add anything else on top of that?
And the notion of adding stretching with the use of baclofen or exclusively on its own, how does that work?
I would say, the more non-drug things we do, the better. Absolutely. I would put myself out of business as a pharmacist because I don't actually recommend a lot of drugs. I always try to promote the non-drug options first, and then, then you can sort of add in drugs here and there. But I always think that non-drug options are the way to go, and they should always be a part of any treatment plan that someone has, regardless of what medical condition it is.
Well said. Okay, any other questions? I know we're ahead of schedule. People an opportunity? No? Okay, so I'll put in my last slide here, and I'll just do my little spiel. I do want to say thank you to Dr. Amy Semaka for your wonderful presentation this afternoon. It's certainly been filled with information that I think that certainly participants can look at now and refer to later. So thank you so much for the time that you've taken for that. It's a great benefit to all of us. I do want to remind people that we do have our MS Navigator that's on the line as well. If there's any further questions, we do have a bit of time with respect to specific resources and services that the MS Society of Canada provides. Now is a great time to ask those questions as well, without having to make appointments or, disrupt your schedule or anything like that. You have Natasha on the line, ready and willing to go. A few more questions popping up while we have some time, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Just in reference to vitamin D, do you find it's helpful, or would you recommend the use of it in terms of
I do. Yes, I do recommend vitamin D. I think it's still being studied in terms of what exactly it's useful for. I mean, there seems to be some controversy. Yes, it is successful, potentially for preventing MS. Who knows, right? But I'm in Alberta, right? So having one of the highest, proportions of MS, I do promote vitamin D use. I don't see, there's no harm in taking it. And if I could potentially prevent someone from developing MS or who knows what, I absolutely would say to take it. So, and I do take it myself. And I've heard from, numerous conferences that I've gone to, and numerous neurologists have suggested that people should be taking vitamin D. So it's cheap, it's harmless. That's why I say, something like that, yeah, why not add it in?
And do you have dosing recommendations? And are the dosing different, or are the doses different for someone who has an MS diagnosis versus someone that does not yet or will not?
Personally, I don't think there has been very clearly defined dose recommendations based on whether you have MS or you don't. I think vitamin D, a general dose that a person should take is between 1,000 to 2,000 international units. Arcelia, I have seen the 5,000 international units promoted by a few doctors, but really I don't know if that's been actually proven to be any more beneficial than the 1,000 or the 2,000. So in that case, you're taking 5 pills compared to 1. So, depending which strength you get. But, yeah, I don't really see a benefit in that myself. Others may, though, of course. And that's their prerogative as well. If they choose to use more, it's fine as well. Any other vitamins or supplements and the WALS protocol? I don't know the WALS protocol, but I'm going to definitely look it up after this. But any other vitamins and supplements, what I have seen coming out more, and this may be something interesting for people to Google as well, is probiotics, specifically in MS. So there has been some research in the gut microbiome as a key sort of instigator with all those immune cells and those bacteria and everything that's sort of living in our gut in triggering immune conditions. So there is definitely some study coming out on the use of probiotics, prebiotics, and you name it. There will be some more evidence, I believe, coming out with that. I was talking to a neurologist about that at a conference as well. So that may be the new thing to kind of look for is, do I take yogurt every day or what do I do, right? So I think that's going to be an interesting research that we'll have to wait for.
Thank you. And there was actually Katie from the MS Society of Canada. She was referring to immunogenesis. Is that the term that you're referencing? And if so, can you remind us of what that means?
Oh, sure. Like immunogenicity, I believe, maybe is that.
Oh, maybe that's.
Yeah. Immunogenicity is when someone's on a biologic or they're starting on a biologic, it's the body's reaction to that biologic. So if I'm a new patient and I'm put on this biologic and it stimulates an immune response from my immune system, that's immunogenicity. That's stimulating of that response. So the drug's coming in and saying, hey, I'm foreign, react to me, and the body will react and potentially deactivate or destroy that biologic's activity. So, of course, you want a drug that is not going to do that. So with ocrelizumab, that's why they modified it and made it humanized. So it's less likely to be recognized as, hey, foreign subject, foreign object here, less likely to stimulate that immune response and be destroyed in the body. So different biologics have different tendencies to spark those immune responses, and some people just themselves as well, that everyone's different. But that's what immunogenicity refers to.
I don't have.
Pardon me? Sorry, is there someone on the line?
I'm sorry, that was me. I have to mute myself.
Oh, okay. I can mute it for you, actually.
Can you? Great. Thanks.
Yep, sure. There we go.
Another question from Ayman. Do you still take vitamin D even if your vitamin D levels are normal? Yeah, there's no harm in taking it even if your vitamin D levels are normal. I mean, you're not going to. Your body is wise in that it's only going to store so much, right? So if you're taking 5,000 a day or 10,000 a day or whatever, of course that's extreme. I wouldn't be necessarily taking that much. But if you're taking 1,000, 2,000 units a day, even if your vitamin D level is normal, of course that's not harmful. So you can definitely do that. I don't think we even check vitamin D levels per se very often. I think there's been some study in only very limited conditions because I think it's sort of generally assumed, I guess, especially in Alberta and other areas that don't get a lot of sun, that we are deficient in a sense, one way or another. So, I don't even think, I haven't seen a vitamin D level in a long time, but that's a good question.
Good. Well, I think we'll leave it at that. I do want to thank all of our participants. It always makes for a great event when we have lots of interaction and questions, so thank you for that. I do want to remind you that a recording of this webinar will be available on the MS Society of Canada's website within a week or so, as well as Brain Exchange's website as well. And Katie, you're on the line. This is Katie Lacey from MS Society of Canada, Alberta, Northwest Territories region. Katie, are you there? Oh, just maybe to remind you, Katie, it's *7 to unmute.
Hi, this is Katie. I'd just like to echo what Jillian said. Thank you to everyone who participated today. We hope that you found the webinar to be useful. Thanks also to Amy and Jillian for providing such a great presentation. And if people have questions afterwards about the MS Society, please reach out to your local chapters or the Knowledge Network, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Also, a reminder that you'll be sent a survey about the webinar today, and we'd be very grateful if you could respond to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. And once again, just on behalf of everyone, to Dr. Amy Semaka, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. Reading your bio, my gosh, you exhausted me just me reading it, so I can only imagine how busy you are. So thank you very much for taking the time out today to spend with us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you to everyone as well.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And wherever you are, it's officially almost the beginning of summer. So get that sunshine with sunscreen, but get that sunshine out there, and hope you have a wonderful afternoon. So thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.